Good afternoon and welcome to another Living Well radio program. You can find us here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. on KATV 89.3 in Anchorage, as well as KJLP 88.9 in Palmer. And you can always find us online at katv.org. My name is Cammie, and I'm joined once again by Betty. Say hi to everybody over there, Betty.
Hello.
Don't act like you're not over there.
I am. I just had a drink of my coffee, and it's cold.
I know.
It tastes pretty nasty. What if anybody bring me a Diet Coke?
Hey.
Is anybody listening that would bring me a Diet Coke with lots of ice?
The problem is where are you when this is actually airing? Are they going to text you and
if
find
they brought
you?
If it brought it to the station, maybe Tom or Kathy or Candy would call me. Say, hey, we got a Diet Coke for you.
I just gave away our secret.
Oh, that it's taped?
It's pre-recorded.
Yeah, live would scare me.
Wouldn't it, though? That's the beautiful thing about doing radio as well.
And that edit button.
Yes, absolutely.
We've used it a time or two.
Yeah,
or 3,
exactly.
or maybe 4.
Okay, that's enough. Listen, we are joined once again by no strangers to our studio here. We, sometimes
people are going to be asking for their autographs now.
I know. This is the thing. It's just so awesome, though, because when God leads, you follow.
Yeah.
And it's just neat that we have been so blessed to have once again Teresa and Beau joining us again in the studio from the Alaska Dream Center. They volunteer their time and talents and gifts there, but they also just have both been willing to share their stories about how God has worked in their life and just the fabric that he has woven through these women. We just really can't get enough of. Every time we interview them, we find something else we want to talk about. So here we are for a third show with Teresa. And Teresa, we want to hear, Betty, you tell us, because you know a little bit about what you want.
Well, she has she has lots of great stories. And so we've tried to narrow it down to 3. I think she's going to try and interweave them together. But she's going to talk about the trip she made with her dad on the Yukon, and about her mother's passing, and she might throw in there about being single and how her desire to be married and how God worked all that out.
Well, and I want to add too, the minute you mentioned that, Teresa, I lost my mom at 21 as well. So our hearts are knit together there, and I'm just encouraged to get to hear your story today about how that played into what God's done in your life. So thank you for sharing.
Well, ever since I was a little girl, I'll start out with the Yukon story, because ever since I was a little girl, I just remember hearing my dad talk about his dream of canoeing the Yukon River across Alaska. And then when my mom died, when I was 21, somehow in the next years, and I don't really know how it happened, but it morphed and became our dream and not just his dream. And so in about 2001, my dad said to me, he was like, Teresa, if we're going to do that trip down the Yukon River, we have to do it soon, because I'm not getting any younger. And if we don't do it soon, I won't be able to. And so we made plans to go the summer he turned 60, which was the summer of 2003. And so at the time, I was working in a therapeutic girls place in South Carolina, and I came home from that, and we made all these plans to paddle 2,000 miles through Canada and across Alaska, and started in mid-July, and so I had been gone for 4 years and came back and started with my dad on this amazing trip down the Yukon River. We started in Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory, and we had one canoe. I had packed like 1 month's supplies into the canoe, and I had another month's supplies sent to Eagle, Alaska, where I asked them to hold it for Yukon Canoeists and used our names, just general delivery. And I had another one sent to Galena, Alaska, 2 towns along the Yukon, and I had winter clothing in the Galena one because I knew it would probably be August or September till we got there. And so that's what we did.
Oh, my.
I'm trying to think of a follow-up question, but my jaw's on the table, so hang on a second.
Well, we had so many amazing things happen on our trip, and we got to meet. Like that was actually my first time to Alaska, and so I got to meet people from the interior and all the little villages along the Yukon River, but also realizing that that there's no roads. It's the Haul Road. The only bridge across the Yukon River in the whole state of Alaska is the Haul Road. And other than that, like, there's no rivers in the lower 48 that aren't dammed or bridges or like, and here we are for thousands of miles and there's no bridges and no dams. And we're just paddling day after day. Camped out at night in a tent, cooked our meals over a fire, went fishing a lot, ate a lot of Arctic grayling and some silver salmon. And then when we got to Anvik, we stopped at Anvik and went, met wonderful people there in Anvik, and went up the Anvik River and went moose hunting back there. And Dad got his moose, and I went silver salmon fishing and blueberry fishing. Blueberry fishing. Blueberry
I was going to
picking.
say, what is that?
That's a new fish.
A new Alaskan fish. No. Picked blueberries, went silver salmon fishing. And, of course, when you catch these salmon, there's more meat than what you can eat before it starts to, like, rot. And I'd never like to waste any food. So I figured out how to, like, there was glass jars where we were in the cabin where we were staying. It was a hunter's cabin, and there was, like, glass jars where people had eaten the stuff out of it. It was just empty glass jars there and some lids and rings. So I was like, oh, okay. So I canned it over the open fire.
Really?
Oh, the open fire?
Yeah.
Had you ever done anything like this before?
I've done wilderness trips before, but nothing of that magnitude. Not even close. And nothing even close to that remote. And so it isn't a particularly dangerous river, but the remoteness of it means if anything happens, there's no help.
Basically, Teresa's the coolest person I know. Is the summary of all of her stories.
Did you have a gun?
We did not at the beginning because we came through Canada and it's really hard to take a gun through customs. And so Dad, once we knew we were going to hunt in Anvik, Dad had his gun shipped to Anvik and we picked it up there to hunt moose. But up until that point, we did not. But we stopped in this. Every time we would stop in these little Indian villages, usually there would be old men sitting down by the river, and they were so interesting, and they were kind of fascinated by our journey, and the fact that we were father-daughter, I think, made it even more fascinating.
Definitely.
But we were doing something that was kind of a throwback to the old days for them. And so we never met with hostility. We only met with kindness. And, but I mean, amazing, amazing kindnesses. But being at this one village, this one older gentleman that we were speaking with, he found out we didn't have a gun, and he like freaked out. And he went home and got his gun and ammunition and gave it to us.
Really?
And my dad and I freaked out. We're like, that never happens. Like, we couldn't even, you can't even buy a gun without getting put on this list of checking through whatever they do before you can buy a gun. But here someone meets a stranger and gives them their gun and ammunition. And so we just met with so much kindness here in Alaska and from the Alaskan Native peoples. And that's just one story. I could follow with 10 more.
So how, your relationship with your dad, how did that had to have changed through this trip?
It's an interesting question because Dad was a hard worker, and he was always providing for our family when I was growing up, and I really didn't see a lot of him. Then once I graduated from college, I went to the community college and just got an associate's in computers. And this was back before the days of Windows. So you turn on your computer and have your little green cursor blinking at you. And so I came back with my associates in computers, and my dad had a trucking company, and I set up the office and became the office manager and started working with my dad. And my dad and I always got along, but at that point we started becoming close. And then my mom got sick. And after my mom died, it was just my dad and I at home. My brothers were both married and gone. And then we got really, really close. And when I got my CDL and I drove truck with my dad for a couple years, my CB handle was Daddy's Girl. And so that kind of gives like a picture of our relationship. But then I went to South Carolina for 4 years and worked there in the girls program. And like I came back different. and went on this trip with my dad. And he had changed in the 4 years. And it was a really hard start. And so here we were looking forward to this trip we had spent years and years dreaming about and 2 years in planning. And now we're finally on this trip. And honestly, all we can do is fight. And I actually left the place in South Carolina burned out. I was disillusioned with God, wondering who he was, probably at the lowest point of my life spiritually that I've ever been. And so safety was like a huge deal for me. Like I was making sure all the T's were crossed and the I's dotted, because if anything happened, it was really remote. And my dad was going nuts and just being like I was being stupid. And when he would say that, then it was like the first time that my dad wasn't the smartest, brightest man alive in my eyes. And we just fought and fought and fought, and it was really hard. And then I remember one day, you know, when you start fighting with the people you love, you fight over the stupidest things. And we were fighting. I don't even remember what it was about, but I just remember it was like really low, and I knew it. And I just remember thinking at the end of that day that something has got to change. And if I could have gotten off of the trip, I probably would have. Not probably, I would have, but there was no way off. And I just remember at that point thinking, you know what? In all of this fighting, there are still all the things I appreciate about my dad are still true. And we need to have more positive in it. And so I told him, I was like, Dad, every evening I'm going to tell you 3 things that I appreciate about you. And my dad just laughed. And he's like, you won't be able to think of that many. So that shows where our relationship was. But I was like, yes, I can. And so that night I told him 3 things that I appreciated about him. And they were like not fluff things, like deep character things and things I appreciated about my dad. And I'll never forget the hungry look in his eyes. And I did the same thing again the next night. And I was being for real. Like none of it was fake or flattery or surface. And the next night I did it again. And then the next night I forgot. And he reminded me. And he's like,
Really?
Teresa, you forgot. And so it was like a week. And then it wasn't necessary after that. And that was the turning point of our relationship. And it has come back and we're closer. And it's closer and stronger than ever.
What a beautiful way to have worked through that.
Mm-hmm.
When there's no other options, you find a way.
How long were y'all together on this trip?
We started mid-July, and we got to Anvik the 1st of September, and so then we were moose hunting for 3 weeks. And then we had 2 weeks driving home yet. We got home middle of October. So it was like 3 months.
That you were together every day?
That we were together every day, all day, and yeah.
Had you cooked on an open fire before?
Yes, I knew wilderness skills, and so did he. So we knew the wilderness skills. The river, there's no river maps of the Yukon River. And so we didn't really have any good maps or anybody else who's done it. Like that made the trip hard to plan, and just kind of the remoteness of it. We knew wilderness skills, but we didn't know the area. And so it transferred, and I knew how to plan long trips in the wilderness because I had already thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail, which is a hiking trail on the East Coast that's over 2,000 miles. So I knew something about those sorts of things, but again, it was not knowing the area, safety from wildlife. We didn't know, we had heard so many conflicting reports about whether you could even fish or not. So we didn't know if we would be able to catch fish or not. So I actually dried a whole bunch of food so that we wouldn't starve if we couldn't catch fish. But we could catch fish then.
So what did you do? You paddled for 6-8 hours a day, and you just pulled over and put your tent up and spent the night? I mean, I have no idea. I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Well,
I don't even know how to ask a question.
In July is lots and lots of daylight. So we never really saw the dark. So we would just wake up, get up, and cook breakfast, and then get out on the river. And we spent a lot of hours on the water. Like we covered a long distance every day just because of the long daylight hours. And then we would stop to fish and cook dinner every evening. And then we would put back on the water again for another couple of hours and then stop and make camp. so that was kind of our routine. And the river changed a lot through its different little geography that it runs through. And so every day was fascinating. And then I kept a journal of our time. And my dad really loved the fact that I was keeping a journal of our time on the river. So he would paddle and I would journal for at least an hour every day. And then we would stop, like whenever we stopped at a village, I would mail it to my aunt, who then, this was back in the day before such instant stuff, then she would type it into an email and send it out to everybody who had requested it. And so that's the way we did stuff back then. We didn't have
Wow.
Facebook and all that stuff.
If your mom was still alive at the time you guys took this trip, would she have gone?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
My mom was, in a different way, as much of an adventurer as my dad. Like, my mom left home when she was, as soon as she turned 21. She grew up in a home where you were expected to work for your parents until you were 21. And as soon as she was 21, she got a job and made a little bit of money and then went to Arkansas. She grew up in Pennsylvania. And then went to Arkansas and worked volunteered her time at a nursing home out there, and loved working with the older people so much that she went from there to nurses training in Colorado. And she was a very conservative Mennonite woman, and it was pretty radical in her culture to do that.
That's really cool that they would have that in common, to be that adventurous. I mean, that's pretty extreme. I want to ask you, you mentioned a couple times, and what I'm seeing is a pattern, Teresa, in how you were really the initiator, it seems like, of a deeper relationship with your dad. You started working in the office with the trucking company. You encouraged the canoeing trip. You contributed to reconciling your relationship on the trip. A lot of girls kind of sit back as we're working with teen girls, and they're just bitter because their dads aren't reaching down to them. So, give us some words that would encourage these girls to be willing to reach out, even though their dad is, what should be the leader in that. You display a different characteristic, and I think that could be really encouraging for girls to get that strength from you of how to do that.
That's an interesting question, and one I haven't spent a great deal of time thinking about.
You probably even did it without thinking about it, but it's very interesting, that I would pick up on that, because we tend to wait for the older or the authority or somebody to kind of come and approach us to build that. But you did that.
Well, I do love my dad a lot. And like, your observation is actually right on target. Because even some other things that we've done together in more recent years, like just 3 years ago, we did this trip through the Everglades in southern Florida, again on a canoe. And then that was in January. And then in March, we came up and volunteered for the Iditarod right here in Alaska.
Really?
And spent some time again back in Anvik, where we have dear friends, and volunteered there when all the dog teams went through, and then went to Nome for all the finish. And it was great. And lots of stories from that time too. Alaska has amazing people that we get to meet. But yeah, both of those are things that Dad would have dreamt about and wanted to do. But then I was the one that said, Dad, if you don't do this, you're never going to get it done. So let's set a date. And then we'd set a date and it would happen. Why that I do that? I love spending time with my dad, and it's worth it. It's so worth it. I don't know what motivated me to do it the first time.
Yeah, but I mean, I just think that's so cool, because you said, and I haven't asked you any other questions about your upbringing, about how close you were with your dad, but you said he was away a lot and worked a lot. I mean, being a trucker, that certainly, would mean that, but you didn't let that create too much distance as you got older. You found a way to come into his world, to spend time with him. And I think that might be key for younger girls to remember, because and I guess the root of why I'm saying all this is because that relationship with Dad is so important.
It's actually really true that I became part of his world. And even now yet, if we, I know that, we're really close and he shares with me, but when we talk, the best times are when I'm in his world. And I am either riding with him in the truck, which he's retired and doesn't do anymore. But that's a really good observation. And being willing to do that and enter into his world for the sake of the relationship. And plus, it's just cool.
Yeah.
I really like how you wanted to end the fighting, the antagonism between the two of you. You took the initiative to come up with 3 things you really admired about your dad. And not many would do that.
Exactly.
We would wait for him to come to us.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was 31 at the time. So I had lived enough of life to know that what we do has repercussions. And the fighting, I didn't like the fighting. Like, that was miserable, and it's a miserable way to live, and I didn't want to live my life like that.
I want to ask you a question, Beau, if you want to shoot the microphone over there. What has it been like for you to have Teresa in your life, and how God brought you guys together?
Oh, I love Teresa so much. I think I would say that, like, even if she didn't do anything else here, God brought her here because I needed her. So, but she does.
And
so
that could
Yeah.
be true.
She does so
Yes.
many other things too, though. But yeah, I needed Teresa. She's been such a good mentor for me, and just, I think sometimes with everything that I've gone through, and with being as young as I am in the ministry that I am, sometimes it's hard to feel like I am worthy of maybe the position that I've been given, or the things that I have to say sometimes. And Teresa's a very validating person, and even just validating, like, the things that I've gone through and the things that I'm feeling. But she's been such a good mentor, and just we make it a point to, like, we go on walks together and talk about life and how we're doing. And she has turned into, like, my best friend out here. And so yeah, so I love Teresa.
I love that.
I sensed that. And so I just wanted to ask, and what is beautiful is, I mean, there's a little bit of an age difference, right?
Yeah,
So-
like a lot. Like, she's less than half my age.
But is there anything more beautiful than that, Betty? How Teresa could come alongside her and
I think I've read that
just-
somewhere in the Bible.
I think so.
would
Titus,
have to
maybe?
Uh-huh.
I would have to say that I'm one of Beau's biggest fans. She's just cool.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, your friendship is, what is the right adjective to put there? It's beautiful. And that's not
Remarkable.
even the best adjective to use, but I just love how I feel your hearts, and just anticipate what God has done and how he's knit you guys together for years to come. It's just awesome.
If we could, Teresa, I think we have a few minutes for you to touch on this. You're single. Could you tell our listeners how you have come to grips with that?
Well, this is, again, I was raised in a Mennonite setting, and so, like, there's just things that you never talk about when you grow up in a conservative home and a conservative environment. But they're realities of our life nevertheless. And so one of those things is the whole subject of sex. And so being very kind of curious about it, and, like, I would have been taught growing up that sex is a really holy thing and honored, but only for marriage. So I couldn't wait to get married, because this is, like, this cool thing that's going to be, like, one of the best experiences on earth. And then I didn't get married. And I was so mad at God for holding out on me that I didn't get to ever have sex if I didn't get married. And it's just not fair that he links the two of those together. Because, yeah. And then the whole thing that goes with sex is just, like, the intimacy and the sexual intimacy. And it's, like, the best experience on earth. And if I don't get married, I don't get to be a part of that. Like, something's just not right about that. But then kind of the whole message, like, as some of my friends got older and didn't get married, this whole message of wait, like, stay a virgin until you get married, wait. Then it turns into disillusionment, because you're like, I did my part. I didn't flirt. I was a good girl, and I waited, and now, God, where are you? Where's the marriage? And starting to become really disillusioned with God. And all these other girls who flirted and did all the wrong things, they're happily married, having kids and families, and, like, God, what are you up to? And some really tough disillusionment. And I just started asking God some of these really hard questions, and And then he started showing me some really cool things. And he started showing me how that in the Bible, from the beginning to the end, how that, and you know, I've spoken sermons on this an hour long, but from beginning to the end of the Bible, sex is a picture of the kind of intimacy that God wants to have with us. And that's only a picture. And the Bible says in Genesis that we were created in the image of God. And we are an image of God. We are a representation. And so, like, the best illustration that I've connected with is, like, if they're like a Rembrandt painting. If somebody does a reproduction of a Rembrandt painting and it's really well done, it might sell at an art auction for thousands of dollars, but it's still a reproduction. But you can tell it's the Rembrandt painting. You can tell what it is. But if an original, authentic Rembrandt went on the same auction, it'd be worth millions. And that's what it means to be made in the image of God. Like, we are an exact replica, but we're only a replica. And that sex is an image of the kind of intimacy that God wants to have with us. And so if I never get to experience that here on earth, I can experience the intimacy with God. That's the real thing. And that's the $1 million picture instead of the $1,000 picture. And by saying that, in my opinion, it's not like lessening the value and the holiness of sex, but maybe even increasing it. But also saying that if you're single and you never get married, God will be everything for you that you need and more. And he has been in my life, and he has brought me into a level of intimacy with him that I never even knew could exist. And it's amazing.
I've never heard it put like that.
Neither have I.
And that is beautiful. What a message that God has given you through that.
That's a message that will not fade into disillusionment when you're 30 and not married.
Yeah.
And it's a message that even when you're 18 gives a purpose to your sexuality far beyond just weight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's just such a beautiful testimony to how God has touched your heart and spoken to you in such a powerful way. And I love how you put that. You said that you asked him some difficult questions, and what he revealed to you were some amazing and beautiful things.
I held a grudge against him for a while because of that.
Yeah. And so was that during the 4 years that you speak of that you were away?
It would have probably been after that.
Okay.
Because I was always busy. Like, I always enjoyed my life. Like, there weren't like periods of my life where I was like, okay, now what do I do next? But I always had lots of things happening and going on in my life. But there was just a time when I was like, okay, I'm getting older now, God, come on. Like I don't want to miss out on this like most gorgeous, beautiful thing on earth. And just kind of started this like resentment grudge thing. And then sometimes, depends what would happen, it would, like, I get really angry. And there was like just certain things that happen sometimes. Like, this one kind of funny story is one time I was already mad about other things. And then I was on a hiking trip, and then I went and got my period yet. And it was just like the last straw. And that day I just yelled at God. I was like, okay, like, this is not right. So my body spends all this energy preparing for a baby every month for 30 plus years, and I've never even had sex. You could have at least made it wait to turn on until you've had sex the first time. And, you know, God always, he is so gracious, and he speaks to us through our anger, and
Yes.
And just brings us back into relationship and right standing with himself. And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It goes back to Beau's statement, if not, if I'd never marry,
Yeah.
you know, will he still be God? Is he still good? And the answer is yes.
I like that. If not. So you've got 2 songs to write. If not, and Tucked Away. You're going to be a busy girl.
Sounds good.
And then you have to come back and play them for us.
Yes,
And
for
let us hear
sure.
'em.
She'll probably whip him out tonight.
You
She's like
think?
that.
That's pretty cool.
Yes, it is. That is really cool. What a gift to have. I tell you, that creativity is awesome. Thank you for sharing it with us. And thank you, Teresa. You're just such a blessing in this short time that we've had with you. It's just been amazing to have met you.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you for that privilege.
Oh, thank you.
Girls, it's been great. I mean, I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you for coming down.
And that is another Living Well program, and you can always find us here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. on KATB 89.3 in Anchorage, as well as KJLP 88.9 in Palmer, and you can always catch us online at katb.org. Thank you.